Well, welcome everyone. I'm Craig Holliday, and I'm happy to be here with a good friend of mine, Locke Kelly. Locke has a master's in divinity. He's a licensed clinical social worker. He's an author of a new best-selling book, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness, available from Sounds True. He's a licensed psychotherapist and recognized leader in the field of meditation. Locke is the founder of the nonprofit Open Hearted Awareness Institute and has worked in community mental health, established homeless shelters, and counseled families of members of and victims of 9/11. Locke graduated from Columbia University, where he received a traveling fellowship to Sri Lanka, India, and Nepal. Locke collaborates with neuroscientists at Yale, UPenn, NYU, in the study of how awareness training can enhance compassion and well-being. His website is effortlessmindfulness.org. He also has another great book, Shift into Freedom, which I really enjoyed and invite you to check out as well. So welcome today, Locke. It's so good to have you here.
Yes, thanks, Craig. It's so good to be with you and get a chance to do a deep dive and talk about some of these things that we love to talk about.
You know, in a real sense, I'd like you just to start off a little bit general. You know, what is your relationship with with ethical training, and how you relate to students, how you relate to individuals, groups? What are some of the major challenges you've seen just as a whole in the spiritual community with teachers? And, you know, maybe you could even share some of your personal challenges. And so I know there's a whole bunch there, and I'm going to invite you just to jump in there.
That's a big question. I'll just say yes. The answer is yes. No. So, I mean, it just seems that ethics has been naturally just kind of almost the framework of doing the service work I've always done, because it comes from, for me, not a external should, but kind of a realization and a motivation that led me to work with people in these different ways. That comes from realizing that we're the same. Realizing, oh, that's me, they're in pain, what can I do to help? And then immediately seeing the vulnerability of people, and honoring that from within, and knowing that, having been through my own grief and difficult times in my life, that I know that during those times we're kind of crazy. We're kind of like all over the place, searching for a life raft, you know, any kind of something to help. So I see the people, you know, struggling and grabbing and looking and wanting and wishing, and you know, noticing that they're like me, that I'm going to treat them with the same loving respect as I would a child who's in need. And so there's, you know, that has been foundational and almost woven naturally into the service and profession that I've done.
I think that's really beautiful, Locke. You know, one of the ways that I kind of speak about that is just calling that the law of oneness. You know, I just see, you know, when you see someone else suffering, you see yourself suffering, and the movement of the heart is a movement of love, and that's really beautiful. You know, the way you describe that. Did you first start teaching, or did you first start counseling, or which one came first, or was it both at the same time?
Somewhat the same time. I think I had started training at a graduate school in spirituality and psychology at Union Theological, which had a joint degree program with Columbia University Social Work School. So I went over on a fellowship to Sri Lanka, India, and Nepal, and did kind of cross-cultural perspectives on healing, where I studied in university and then sat in monasteries and did some work with some local healers and shamans in Sri Lanka. And then came back and started teaching some meditation, and then finished my training as a psychotherapist, clinical social worker in psychiatric outpatient, psychiatric inpatient, and then community mental health. So I think that, the training of certainly a psychotherapist or social worker particularly, are very sensitive not only to individual, but social, environmental,
Cultural.
cultural, sexism, race, immediately, and then the classical training of realizing what transference is, how clients will fall in love with you or they'll hate you, like to kind of, and to realize that that's about them, that they're going to go through their process, and that my role is to create a safe container.
Yeah.
And to be.
Yeah. Why don't you explain that term, Locke? Because I think a lot of people
Sure.
Who don't have psychological training,
Sure.
they get confused about what transference is, what countertransference is, projection, and how that all kind of works. Because I've seen a lot of people just trip over that one.
Yeah. I mean, the simple word, it is very similar to projection. Transference means you're transferring your inner needs or your relationships with past caregivers or romantic relationships that you're starting to feel the feelings of love and care. Once the sense of safety and love are there, then those needs, your needs for parenting, for romantic love, for all these kinds of love, start to arise as parts of you, and then they get transferred onto the therapist or the guru, right? The teacher.
Yeah.
So this is the classic situation. So transference, and then countertransference is just saying the same thing is happening somewhat for the therapist or the teacher. The countertransference just means that we need to acknowledge our own kind of inner parts that start to feel loved and feel like there's devotion and there's vulnerability, and then we feel, oh, now we're safe, and different parts of us that have needs, wants, and traumas from childhood begin to come up, and so we start to project or transfer them in a way that's not actually what's happening in the room onto our clients or students.
Yeah. And not only in a way that's, that it's not actually happening, in reality, as, sometimes, a lot of times it can create incredible confusion and dangerous situations. And, one of the things that I've seen, with a lot of spiritual teachers is, or just, even therapists, is it's easy to see when people are projecting on you. It can be easy if you're trained in that.
Yeah.
But where a lot of people fall short is seeing where they're projecting, onto others. And, this is something that my teacher, he harassed me about, or gave me a little bit of hell about when I was younger. As he said, he spent about 20 years training me to teach, but he'd often said to me, he said, Craig, you get too close to the students, you're too friendly with them. And then a lot of times, I'll just have great friendships with with my students, and that's a place where, I have to keep myself in check, where, if I didn't have so many beautiful women in my life, my wife and all my daughters, I could get in trouble with ladies, within the Sangha. But, for me, it's, where I get in trouble is, I meet someone, a student, and I just see how they're so much alike me. And
Mm-hmm.
then next thing we're hanging out together, whether it's riding bikes or whatever, in our little small mountain town. And
Yeah.
I've noticed, oh, then the nature of our therapeutic relationship really changes. And I see, oh, that does a disservice to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I need to, pull back and
Yeah.
make sure I'm not, having my need for friendship met,
Right.
say in, for example, a student, or, of course, with a client, it would be, that would be considered a dual relationship and would be
Sure.
unethical.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the that dividing line between, well, what's a student and what's a client, because you and I are very similar. If we're trained as therapists and work
Mm-hmm.
as therapists, and the issue with often with spiritual teachers and their students is they don't necessarily treat students like a client, because they're not necessarily a client. But then, of course, if we don't have strong boundaries there, then it can get messy. Now, the biggest examples of messiness, of course, is romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But then, there's other types of messiness with money, power,
Sure.
and maybe you can speak a little bit about some of that.
Sure. Absolutely. Thanks for for sharing that, Craig. Yeah, it's funny. I I developed this own little way of feeling this, what I call the lines of love. So lines of love are kind of like, there's different kinds of love, and that I can recognize my need or feeling of love towards somebody because they're similar or we have something in common. But then the lines of love are like, there's, father-daughter love, uncle-niece love. There's friendship love. There's, like, in Greek, they say there's eros, which is erotic, romantic love. There's philia, which is friendship love.
Yeah.
So you have a friend. So I have many women who are friends of mine, and we have so much fun. We are playful and, feel that we can be men and women, but it's friendship, it's colleagueship, and that's just really powerful.
And there's
then,
clear boundaries there, of course.
Yes, and that's the boundary is that. So when I think of lines of love, I almost think of it like wires. So there's the red wire and the green wire, and if you cross them and cut them, then you're gonna get explosion or shock or short,
go haywire,
short circuit, or some trouble. Of kind of and then the last in the Greek is agape, which is kind of the non-dual love, or the love of God, or so those three love. But then there's then we make it relational. We see the friendship love, we see colleague love, we see the love, which is kind of a of like a boss or somebody who works for you, and then you have love for them, but there's a different boundary than a therapist client and student teacher. And there can be, if the boundary is clear and the communication is open, and it stays within its line, and there's great freedom. So it's interesting that the metaphor sounds restricting, as if you have to stay in your green wire line, but it actually gives you great power because you're both connected, and then and then you can flow because you have a boundary.
Really deep.
And you go really deep. It's so that's my framework that served me well. So there's a willingness to be fluid and to be clear on what the communication or perception or expectations, or reading the cues, and just checking things out with people early on. I mean, I had a lot of friends who were a little older who were involved with cults, and they had gotten into a dependency relationship, and then with a teacher, and then some had been sexually, compromised by their teachers who promised different things and presented themselves different ways. So, so there's a important. It's important to acknowledge the power of love and the need for love, and yet to see both the structure and the flow of it, and acknowledge my own parts and own needs.
Yeah. There's so much in what you said there. One of my teachers, just looked me in the eye once and told me very clearly, the Buddha loved boundaries.
Yeah.
And boy, has that teaching just stuck with me,
Yeah.
so deeply, because, that has just been a pillar inside. And I realized, oh, I love boundaries too, because boundaries keep us safe and they help us to go really, really deep.
That's right.
And, well, most of us think of spirituality, we think of boundaryless.
Yes,
And
that's right.
and of course, there's the experience, of the unbounded, of
Yeah.
just letting go into absolute freedom and experiencing these incredible non-dual, awakened states of one's own being.
Yeah.
But when we're in a human body, it's important. It's important to know what the rules are, what the boundaries are, what the expectations are. I love the one just the line you said, around father daughter, because I can look at clearly. I have all these girls in my life, and so two beautiful girls, one who's going into college and the other one going into kindergarten. But I look at just having very clear relationships with them, and it just keeps everything simple. Like, I'm your dad. That's I'm
that's
not your best friend, I'm not this thing or that thing. I'm your dad.
That's it.
And then the love can go deep, between, father, daughter.
Yeah.
And, things get messy. I see some people, I was working with an individual and actually a couple once, and this is many, many years ago. And they were telling me about their relationship, and they had all this struggle, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on. It just felt like there was a third energy in the room that I did not understand. And, through some little bit further investigation, they told me, oh, their young daughter still slept in bed with them. And I said, oh, okay, no big deal. And then I said, well, how old's your daughter? And they said, well, she's 13. I said, oh, okay, well, that's probably not helpful. And that's where things get messy, where the energy starts getting pulled, in one direction or the other. And then all these games, start being played. And, you brought up cults. I mean, there's the transference that happens and the countertransference between the teacher and the student. But there's also that whole group think that happens in communities, and sanghas, which can be very supportive, but also very messy as well.
Can create again, that initial need for bonding, or what they call attachment, healthy attachment, which, interestingly, how in spirituality we try to be non-attached. So they're not exactly the same word, but in the real meaning, we need both. We need healthy relationship or healthy attachment, and we need to be non-attached to that small sense of self that overly or only is looking for that as the source of love. And yet, once we are non-attached and discover the move from bound to boundless to boundaries, and we have both the boundless and the boundaries, then we still have the needs and the relational needs, but then we have the essential sense of no self, or true nature, or beingness that has a loving perspective, that's embodied and interconnected and sees kind of from the eyes of the heart what's true, and feels the resonance with others, and feels grounded in like safety and okayness, and feels the parts that come up with wanting and needing and imagining and fantasizing as parts that have these feelings and can be with your parts rather than blend with your part and act out
Yeah.
from that part. And that's kind of the psychological piece that I work a lot with, is this parts-based way to be your true self without denying your humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. So Locke, that's another word I'm going to invite you to define.
Okay.
You know, I do parts work as well. And so I know what you're speaking about, but the audience may not understand parts work.
Yeah. So, So interestingly, in our usual sense of Western philosophy, we define, I think, therefore I am. So
right.
we have an I, and it's basically a thinker. So there immediately is a little bit of a problem going on. And in our conventional sense of self, and even in our usual most psychologies or some psychologies, even saying, well, love yourself, like, well, who's loving and who's the self?
Yeah.
So there's some.
I get that question a lot. Who's loving? Who's right. Like, I'm supposed to do what? Isn't there just one of me? But, right. I always say, inside, do you realize, like, sometimes you have 2 voices in your head? Sometimes you have 10 voices in your head.
Yeah.
Those are the different parts.
That's the parts. So this, so there's different parts-based systems, but the sense that we are multiple, in that we have these polarized or these different parts, managing part, a child part, a part that wants to go and do this, a part that says don't go and do that. And in some first initial meditation systems, what you do is tend to break that down from a solid separate sense of self into thoughts, feelings, and sensations.
Yeah.
So while you're sitting on a cushion, you use like a microscope, and you go like, that thought, I don't want to keep sitting here on this cushion. You think, that's a thought. You start to create an observer or a mindful witness, and you learn that, that's just a thought. There's a feeling of not liking. There's a sensation. These are just energetic patterns that are coming and going. And the sense is that can be very helpful to just realize they're that. But when you stand up and walk around in the world, if you just deal with them as thoughts, that's a thought, that's a feeling, then you've created like this manager that's starting to say that's a thought, that's a feeling, and you've kind of created a thinker that's not who you are, and you're treating everything like it's it's almost an illusion, or it's just coming and going. Whereas what the parts-based system says is, yes, on a level of microscope, they're just energy patterns, but they pattern into small identities, like as a child, and they have views, and they tend to be related to parts of your body, and they tend to be stronger. Some are stronger. They sneak up the back of your head, and they land in the seat of the self, and then they just are you. And then 10 minutes later, it's like, well, what was that? That was just a thought. Well, if you deal with it like it's a part of you, and then you use the spiritual practices that you and I do, which is to go from bound to boundless awareness, then that awareness knows itself, and then that awareness is none other than form, so none other than energy and form, and that's embodied, and there's this loving presence that's here as the primary open-hearted awareness, or no self. Then you can watch what arises, and what you start to realize is, some are thoughts, and some are beliefs, and some are stories, but there's really like little parts that think they're me,
Yeah.
And then what I found is if you actually treat them like they are you, or they think they're you, or they think they're a real entity, and you ask them, send them love and ask them their story and let them talk about their feelings,
Yeah.
there's this huge capacity to be with the most intense parts, the traumatized parts, the hateful parts, the rageful, the terrorized, the ones that have been hidden and repressed
Yeah.
are now smaller, even though they're, if you're coming from a self that's loving your parts and then unburdening them, returning them to part of the team of the human world and keeping self, no self, whatever you want to call that, different people, awareness-based, open-hearted awareness, then the unity of the transcendent and the immanent, the ability to wake up and grow up, has this new everyday practice.
Yeah, and I think that's really well said, and that's to me that's the biggest struggle that I've had as a teacher is
Mm.
getting people to do this deeper work,
Mm-hmm.
stay with it. There's a lot of people who are really interested in just getting a blast, say, of non-dual awareness
Yeah.
and stepping into non-self or no self. But what I found is that most individuals use what I call spiritual violence,
Mm-hmm.
they're witnessing
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and attacking every aspect of
Right.
themselves and repressing.
Right.
And I like to look at it, very much like the parts as a family system. If we have a strong authoritarian parent at the top,
Right. Right.
say as mindfulness awareness, attacking the little parts and saying they're not allowed to exist,
Right.
well, what happens in those types of families? Well, then the kid develops addiction to heroin or, one of these pharmaceuticals that, are
Right.
killing so many people, or, there's alcoholism, or, we have these intense desires that come forward. And, one of the things that I liked, that you said, because it's very similar to how I teach, is as you step into love and you and just choose, like actively choose to love the parts of the self.
Yeah.
What happens is those parts of the self, oftentimes they're given a chance to develop. And so
Yes,
they may
that's right.
have to go through a little bit of anger and
Yep.
then,
Yeah.
then maybe a little bit of sadness.
Yeah.
But then what happens after sadness? They begin to release
Mm-hmm.
and they let go into the experience of freedom.
Yeah.
And they trust that it's okay to let go. And you're more likely to experience, no
Mm-hmm.
self or, true freedom through absolutely loving oneself
Yeah.
than you are through absolutely denying oneself.
Right.
Denying can be I think, very powerful in the beginning. You just
Yeah.
get your power all together and say, okay, I know who I am. I'm not all these crazy parts. But
Yeah.
eventually, through that law of oneness and the law of love, it's like, oh, how does love operate? Like you said in the beginning,
Right.
is
Yeah.
it's inclusive. It sees all these little aspects
Yes.
as me. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad you said that in the beginning. And
Yeah.
but it's hard work to do because people have to
Yeah.
face pain. They have to face difficulty. And
Right.
one of the things I also like to speak about is if we step back and look at, say, head, heart, gut awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Head is, say that the witness consciousness. The heart is the love you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the gut, I find, really wakes up
Mm-hmm.
through the willingness to sit with things that are deeply painful, difficult, overwhelming, existential fear, anger, rage, sadness, jealousy,
Right.
whatever it is. And when we do this parts work, to me, it's, very much a path
Yeah.
of liberation. It's through love we're liberating these aspects of ego. And if we
Yeah.
ignore them, they revolt with
Yeah.
neurosis.
Yeah. And then we get caught in the getting it, losing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said about, spiritual violence or creating, some attempts that many of us have gone through, and some systems are, trying to kill the ego, trying to repress the ego, trying to deny, I'm only pure awareness. There's nobody here named Locke.
Yeah.
as if it's, a spiritual bypass or transcendent only,
Yeah.
or just dealing with it like it's story or emotions aren't real, they're just coming and going. So this integration, like the Zen says, form is emptiness, but don't forget the second part, emptiness
Yeah.
is form.
Yeah.
So this balance is really the Buddhist view of non-dual. Isn't that the pure awareness is not dual. It's that you discover the pure awareness as the transcendent, and then it includes the relative, and
Yeah.
they're not two.
Yeah.
So in Buddhism, non-dual is actually embodied
Yeah.
interconnectedness.
Yeah.
And so you can't really so when you get to that place, whether you go down head, heart, gut, and in some ways the first heart is actually the emotional heart. When you go head, then you go emotional heart, then you go gut. But almost before you get to gut, or you almost have to find the open-hearted awareness, which is aware of head, heart, gut.
Yeah.
The self, that's why sometimes I playfully call it no self, because it's not this self, but it's the beingness or the true nature or the whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
But that has a loving presence. And so that can bear what seems to be unbearable.
Exactly.
Only that. So it's not that you're trying to love yourself, it's you're finding the self that can love your parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So discovering the self that you always have been, that is capable and cannot be hurt and can be with anything, and being that with the parts of yourself. So loving yourself, in this way is kind of like find the self, be the self that loves, can be love your part. And then it does liberate. And then liberation and spontaneous liberation and energetic liberation happens when there's this tremendous holding and safety from this something greater than yourself that is essentially who you are, that then acknowledges what's really here. What's this part? What is this saying? What's this anger? You can't really take your spiritual temperature by what's arising. In fact, it almost should be like, okay, bring it on. Like, here we go. Now that I've discovered this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Locke, I'm really happy you made that distinction between the two different hearts. I often speak about that as well, like the personal heart, the emotional heart versus true heart, because a lot of people, they complain to me. They say, Craig, you say get in touch with your heart, but when I get in touch with my heart, I feel anger.
I
feel sadness. I feel
that's
agitation.
Good.
And I say, okay, good. That's the emotional heart, and we're feeling that emotion. Can you look a little deeper?
Yes.
And get in touch, with that gentle presence of love, that gentle presence of innocence.
Yeah.
From that place of innocence, can we love?
Yes.
The pain, the sadness, the heartache, the rage. What your ex-wife or ex-husband said to you, your kid, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's such an important distinction, because people
get
over that.
I mean, as long as we're playing here, so I make a distinction between four. I call them the five hearts. So the first one is the emotional heart, which tends to be kind of almost like gets up in your throat and like right here, like, oh. So that people drop in and now they're in this heart. And your physical heart on this side, which has some intelligence and has some cells that are similar to your brain cells. So there is an intelligence, but it's not that heart. Then you could say the heart chakra, and that's an energetic center that's, again, important, but not what we're talking about. And then there's actually Ramana Maharshi's cave of the heart, which is this black velvet night sky resting deep into the void heart, which I do a meditation for. And then the heart mind, or the heart space, actually touches all of those four. And it's almost like a doorway that opens up behind you to what I say is awareness has your back. And then that, like a wave in the ocean, comes into this form of this ground of being, this feeling of safety and okayness. And the Augustine called it in the Christian tradition, oculus cordis, the eye of the heart.
Yeah.
So you almost see and feel as if you've dropped from head mind to heart mind, and you're literally, and then your heart drops kind of into your gut. So the center of your body is now in your pelvis or your gut,
Yeah.
and the center of your identity is in your heart, and then your head is kind of like empty. It's like sky above your shoulders.
Yeah. And that's a radical shift when we start to experience, something like that. And boy, is there great freedom.
Yeah.
But the thing that I really appreciate about it is there's great love, is that there's a courage in there to face, whatever pain is there. And see, this is where it's a little different than, say, psychology. Psychology is often taught, the old school approach is like, the therapist who's kind of hiding behind the couch, in his chair or her chair. And, and I don't like that model because it deeply lacks love. And a lot of modern psychology is, it's ego based, but it's, it's like supreme healthy ego based, which is of course a huge step forward of just having, being able to speak with a very sane adult in the room. That can be very helpful.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is, it's something much more profound, is allowing this greater presence, in a sense, to live through you as you.
Yes.
And it's a radical shift. And
it is. And the thing, I think I'm, in working with, I co-teach with a guy who has a system, internal family systems. His name is Dick Schwartz. And he and I both worked in inpatient psych and outpatient psych. And what we both found is, there's a kind of a history in many of these traditions. I know in Tibetan Buddhism, they say, oh, well, these higher teachings of recognizing your true nature are only for the advanced students. And most people are wet wood. Some people are damp wood and they can't get it. And others, only the dry wood can get it. So there's kind of a hierarchy and a little bit of an elitist thing, and it's kept from us. But what we both discovered is not only can people who are inpatient, like somebody who's suicidal and cutting themselves, and is asked, is there a part of you that wants to hurt yourself? And they say, well, yeah, of course. And is there a part of you that wants to live? And they'll go, wait a minute. Well, yeah. And then you ask, well, who's aware of those two parts?
Yeah.
And they will go, well, I am.
Yeah.
And how do you feel toward these two parts? Well, curious and kind of feel compassion for them. So those who are supposedly least likely to recognize their true nature can recognize their true nature. And not only that, it's what they need to recognize in order to heal.
Yeah.
So this is the radical thing.
You give them your power. You give them their power back.
Yeah, that's right.
And this, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of the things that my teacher, he used to tell me. He said, Craig, your first job is to see each individual, whether they walk into your office or they're a student, that they are divine, that they are God. So that's your first job as a teacher, as a healer, as a therapist, whatever we're doing. It's our first job to see that they have, the capacity, not only that they have the capacity, that this is what they are.
Yes.
This is what they are. And it's one of the shadows of, the world of psychology, especially in the modern medical view, is in a sense, you're trained to diagnose. And so you're looking for people, like you're looking, where are they broken? Where are they confused? Where are they neurotic? And, I like to start off with, this individual, they're
Hmm.
perfect, they're divine, they're a child of the Most High. However you say it, you see
Yeah.
that they are good, that they are whole.
Hmm.
And then from there, you
Yeah.
admit, oh yeah, and then there's these, like you're describing, neurotic parts. And when you
Yeah.
start with that, it's such a
Hmm.
radical difference than if you look. I mean, I can say I've done a lot of therapy myself
Hmm.
personally, and I've been fortunate to work with master therapists. But there's been a couple of times I set foot into an office, say with a school counselor or
Hmm.
someone working with a friend or whatever, and sat in a therapy office with someone who was just looking at you like you're
Hmm.
broken.
Yeah.
And boy, does that just feel terrible. And
Yeah.
it's a great experience, for your students and your clients, Locke, to have someone like you who believes in them,
Hmm.
who believes that what they are
Yeah.
uh, is divine, what they are is
Yeah.
holy, and
Yeah.
that they have the power, to awaken and to see, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really confused here. And, then
Yeah.
of course love can come forward, they get their power back, and
Yes.
then
Yeah.
healing can begin.
Yeah. And I I do that even in initial groups.
Yeah.
I immediately kind of point uh, and give little glimpses so that people in the audience start to speak from their awakened nature.
Yeah.
I sometimes call it popcorn satsang.
Yeah.
So they start to pop, and there's Lao Tzu speaking from the back right corner, and there's
Yeah.
Kuan Yin in the front left, just
Yeah.
like speaking like, yeah, this is what their experience is. They're just speaking from their awake nature,
Yeah.
and so they get a direct experience that I'm not even telling them that. I'm showing them or giving them glimpses, and that's been my main work, is to kind of reverse engineer a lot of these advanced practices, and to find a way to give people, kind of the tools to navigate their own consciousness, both from spirituality and psychology, and bring them together, um, in a way that you give the power back to the student. And
Yeah.
so that, as a teacher or a therapist, I'm a facilitator or a coach or um, a enthusiastic support, or like a mechanic who people come in for fine tuning, once in a while, like a little tune
Yeah.
up, and then back they go to find their own way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can even give a plug for Locke right now, that his book, Shift into Freedom,
Mm,
uh, especially the audio book where, he
mm,
guides you through it, I found personally tremendously helpful, and have
mm,
invited many of my students to read it and to get
mhm.
copies of it, because, I think it's so true what you're saying is you're giving the power to the student. And when you do that, that hierarchy really
Right.
breaks down.
Yeah.
It really breaks down between, the idea of, say, all-knowing guru, and,
Right.
we're just bowing at their feet, or,
Yeah.
Lama knows all, or this and,
Right.
this and that. And, I think that's really essential.
It is.
And
Yes.
the
Yeah.
second thing I'd like to say,
Yeah.
about that is, when you invite students to speak,
Mm,
it actually, you're helping them to integrate in
mhm,
real time, and not only integrate the awakening, but own it, to step into
mhm.
it, to begin to live
Yeah.
it. And, this is something my teacher did with me. And it used to drive me crazy because
Mm.
I would just want to sit and be silent. And
Right.
part of my wound, just growing up, was I kind of grew up in a
Mm,
military family, so I was
mm,
told to be quiet all the time.
right.
And so, you know, because of my wound, was telling me to be quiet, I was really good at
Mm,
being the guy who was just sitting in meditation,
mhm,
being silent and not speaking. And then having a teacher who was constantly inviting me to speak, to share, it helped me to embody,
mhm.
to integrate the experience, and to actually be able to live it in real life. And um, Bach, that's just one of the things I think you're a master at, because
Mhm.
I've sat in your groups before, and
Yeah.
you invite everyone,
Hmm.
basically to speak the truth of their direct experience.
Hmm.
And this is something not many people are trained in.
Right.
A lot of
That's
people can
right.
go on retreat and have a big experience,
Hmm.
but then they don't know how to open their mouth
Yeah.
and engage in, right
Yeah.
action or live from the heart,
Yeah.
be from the heart, experience from their heart.
Hmm.
And a lot of spirituality, in a sense, is taught in a monastic way of,
Right.
you wake up, but then you're just silent and the world's an
Right.
illusion.
Yeah.
And then there's no understanding, well, how do I live here on planet Earth?
Right.
And if we don't have that understanding, then of course the shadows can come forward. We can get
Right.
into ethical nightmares. We could be doing spiritual violence or bypassing. In fact,
Yeah.
you have all these great terms, that you coined. And so maybe you'd mention a couple of those about cognitive overpass and psychological underpass.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in trying to translate some of this fortunate meetings with, great teachers of meditation from different traditions, and then having these texts, these kind of advanced texts, only be available in the last 20 years. So we're really fortunate living in this time. So I threw myself into that. But my interest was in reading them and then experiencing them and then translating them back to, okay, let's put them in language of description, but then more importantly, which is the real work, is put them in language of conveying a pointer so that someone else says them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so the cognitive, so there's a term that we all know, spiritual bypass, which is becoming too spiritual and denying our own humanity, and one version of that I call being caught in the witness protection program,
Yeah.
which means that you have the initial awakening, which I call waking up, and then I say waking in, and then waking out to relationship. So waking up from the small self to the pure awareness, and then if you stop there and hang out in the witness protection program, you stay detached and are not embodied and just feel like I'm pure awareness and everything else is illusion.
Yeah.
Then you wake in. Some people say wake down into your body. Then there's a kind of spacious and pervasive embodiment that's interconnected. And then you wake out to action and love and
Yeah.
compassionate activity. So there's also, when you come from recognition of waking up, if you come back to the thought-based knowing and the thinker or the spiritual ego, you can do what I call a cognitive overpass, which is to have an initial awakening, but then make it into an intellectual understanding. Oh, I'm nobody, you're nobody, there's nothing here, we just need to accept everything as it is, and it becomes kind of platitudes and attempt to kind of make it. So that's the cognitive overpass. And then the psychological underpass is the other phrase, which is from my psychological community, are people who kind of deny the subtle realm of awakening. And so they just continually dig into the past and just do psychological work and get some relief, and then go back and do psychological work, and then eventually they develop kind of a healthy ego, but they've kind of, it becomes like a role where they have to have repressed certain emotions, because in my view and experience, the smartest, healthiest ego cannot bear a full emotional human life. So the emotions are bigger than a small little mini me. So you have to wake up in order to continue to grow up. And so you can get caught in that underpass, psychological underpass. But if you wake up, you can get caught in the spiritual bypass unless you continue to grow up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Locke, one of the things that I found deeply interesting is, just looking at and being curious with the question of why. Like, why do people say, I call it like building a fort
Mm-hmm.
around, their quote unquote, awakened experience that they
Yeah.
had, and they build the fort. And so, I've spoken
Yeah.
at great length about this, but I'm going to invite you to share.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think people get stuck in those different places? So
Yeah.
looking at the shadow of each of those and
Right.
why they do that, because I think it's helpful to see, oh, when you see why you do it, you're less likely to hold on to it
Yeah.
and to hang out, in that fort, that
Yeah.
fortified sense of, self.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons, but I'll talk about the two main ones. And
Yeah.
and at the end of this new book, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness, I have an appendix, which has all these different. It's called traps, detours, and rerouting instructions.
Oh, beautiful.
So
Yeah, I look forward to getting a copy of that.
it's a little fun way
Like
of.
a roadmap, huh?
It's like a roadmap, but
The game.
it's like a little game. Yeah, we should make a little video game. We already talked about maybe making a rap video with some of
Yeah.
these phrases,
Yeah.
So, yeah. So the sense of probably the two main things are that we have a limited map is the first one. In other words, that if the map just says, oh, you're either this small separate sense of self or you're pure awareness,
Yeah.
then you're going to get it and lose it.
Yeah.
Then the other related one is if we are this pure awareness, one of my pointers is, can you go from conceptual knowing to not knowing, and then can you go to the not knowing that knows? In other words, can you then be aware from non-thought based, wordless flow state, which is actually intelligent, but it isn't referencing thought continuously. It's dropped actually then into heart mind.
Yeah.
So if you stay in pure awareness, you're either going to be detached or you have to come back to function by creating a manager or an ego.
Yeah.
So you have to discover the conceptual knowing, the not knowing that knows, which is embodied and open-hearted. And then that development of heart mind there's very few instructions, even in advanced texts, on how to make those moves. Yeah. And in many of the teachers that I know are kind of like, well, that's curious. Well, oh yeah, they should. I don't know, where is that? Or they'll say like, oh, there was a teacher of mine that taught me that, but I didn't understand it. And these are like Rinpoches, that are. So this, I think it's not that difficult to have that map and then to feel that this is the move. And I kind of lead through this Mahamudra style map of what I call the 5 foundations of effortless mindfulness, from unhooking awareness to discover awareness. Then awareness is aware of itself without your help. Then that awareness is aware that it's non-dual, that it's not separate from thought, sensation, and energy. So it's a kind of awareness energy that's not two things, that's not coming, going, that actually is dancing, and that's embodied. Yeah. And then the 5th is this open-hearted awareness, which is the new operating system. So literally you need a new operating system, otherwise you're going to go back to cognitive operating system that thinks about that. And then, so that's the big first reason, which has a lot of parts to it.
Yeah, so you said that one of the reasons is people have a limited map.
Yeah.
And I think, oftentimes that when we have a limited map, basically it's either this or it's that.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm either awake or I'm not. It's all God or it's not.
Yes, that's right.
Flip-flop back and forth. And if we just look at, say, I like to look at, non-dual awakening as, say, the springboard of humankind development. And so, regular psychological development will take you so far.
Yeah.
But if we have, like a little hiccup in our psychological development where we're holding on to either or thinking, we'll get stuck. in a trap like you're describing, that it's
Right.
I'm awake or I'm not, or I'm awake and everything else is an illusion.
Right.
And often people hang on to those, because of fear,
Yes. Yeah.
because of great fear of
Yeah.
saying, I don't want to go down into that body
Right.
and face all that. A
Yeah.
lot of times people will use profanity when they speak about themselves. I don't want to face all that. I'll use
Yeah.
a polite word, junk or garbage. And to me, it's like you start getting into these deeper places through allowing love to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And love is inclusive. It's not, again, either or.
Yeah. Yeah. So that exactly. So you kind of picked up. That's the second reason I would say is that once you have initial awakening, the reason people turn back is that you now are going to start to have either a spontaneous detox, or you're going to see more clearly and feel more clearly this the things you said. I'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
now becomes later. so, so that they start to come up, and you're like, oh no, and then you collapse, and then you literally get thrown back initially because not only the ego has left, but the ego defenses will come right back.
Yeah.
Because they're saying, no.
Yeah.
Like, I'll have a little awakening, but I'll stay out here in the witness protection program, then I'll come back here and then repress everything.
Yeah, good.
So finding this open-hearted awareness, this no self, and having a map that says, okay, there are going to be parts that are coming up, but they're parts. No matter how big they are, they're not even close to the power or the capacity or the space of love and open-heartedness and
that
universal
you are.
That you are. And so when you feel that, and then you have this feeling of being collapsed back, you just stay and go, like, I call it dog zen. I say, wait, stay, and then you're like, and then it starts to, like, terror comes up, and you're sweating, and you're just like, how do you feel toward that part? Like, oh, I feel it's okay. It's not going to kill me. Then, so there's the fear. The fear is the fear of ego death, which literally leads to the fear of physical death.
Yeah.
So that trust and knowing, by knowing self that knows parts, that there are parts. So just that little addition to the map. Oh, there's parts of me that hate. Oh, there's parts of me that have tremendous rage.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what do you mean? I'm full of rage? No, there's a part of you that has a lot of rage. Oh, there's a part of me. Oh, that's a part of me.
Great distinction.
Yeah.
Great distinction. And I think that's where people get really confused is, like you said, is they're confused. Well, how big is the ego? Is the ego actually me, or am I the space that actually can see? can see?
Yes.
And when we don't know that, when we don't trust that,
that's
easy to get lost. And that's one of the beautiful things I like about having you here on the program, Locke, is you're so clear and you're so exact, and you've really, really good, exact, precise language, which is, very helpful.
Yeah, and I'm not doing it to be an intellectual or to kind of discuss theory or philosophy. It's like you feel it's like feeling the difference. Like, oh, is that sadness or is that fear? Oh, that's sadness. Oh, that's fear. Oh, okay. Like, oh, this is pure awareness. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I look from pure awareness and everything's coming, going, oh, that's a meditation state. Now I've actually gone out of, because there's two things. Oh, wow. They're calling that non-dual, but that's, okay, let me stay as pure awareness. Now, what if I'm curious about whether whatever arises is made of awareness? Oh, it is made of awareness.
Yeah.
Oh, it feels like it's made of awareness. Oh, now I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
So that non-dual move is
Yeah.
one of the things I spend time with in this, what I call the non-dual is, many people call the non-dual recognition of pure awareness, but it's actually from kind of the Buddhist perspective, it's when pure awareness feels, directly experiences, oh, sensation, energy, thought, feeling are not other. It's a dancing intelligence
Yeah.
It's like the quantum field arising as particles and waves.
Yeah.
And now there's a oneness. That's what the
Yeah.
not two-ness or oneness is now. And now we're interconnected with everyone. Oh
Yeah.
my God. And now it's kind of ordinary and like,
Yeah.
oh, but I'm here and you're there, but we're connected.
Yeah.
And it's
And
not
I
this
don't have
or
to
that.
be, I don't have to be afraid. And,
Yeah.
to take a step back before we're speaking about seeing it in others.
Yeah.
When we can begin to see it on an emotional level,
Yeah.
especially, this is one of the reasons I love working with trauma.
Yeah.
When we can relate to trauma and experience trauma on a non-dual level and to see, oh, that anger, like oftentimes I say, well, anger, if you feel into the energy of anger, Satchitananda, there's
Yeah.
a quiet intelligence there to it. There's, there's an incredible spaciousness
Yes.
and hugeness to anger. There's
Yeah.
a power to it, an
Mhm.
immensity to it. And when
Yeah.
you feel into it, it's alive, it's moving, it's vibrant. It's not disconnected like you're describing from
No.
awareness. It's made out of the same stuff
Yeah.
as awareness itself. And to me, when I first began to realize this, that was just utterly mind-blowing.
Mhm. Yes.
It blew my mind to realize, oh, anger, sadness, fear, guilt, rage, whatever it is, it's all made of
Yeah.
awareness.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I don't have to be afraid of this. And
That's right.
when we realize I don't have to be afraid of it, then it's like, oh, then you can be much more curious about
Yeah.
it.
And
Not
that's
struggle with it so much.
and that's the difference between being pure awareness and not being afraid of it because it comes and goes.
Yeah.
And actually feeling it and being totally in it and not being afraid of it.
Yeah.
While feeling really juicy, while feeling like, oh, wow, I'm so human. I don't know if I can take it.
Yeah.
But then you feel like, oh, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
I feel I'm alive and I'm free.
Yeah.
And that's the real beauty of what, when we bring these, the clarity to this kind of contemporary vision. That's why I love talking with you and other colleagues, because I think we're trying to create a kind of contemporary support for awakening that brings, both science and ancient wisdom traditions together in a way that's very ethical and very grounded, and yet is like, let's go for it. Let's, if awakening, just keep going, because it just keeps, like the bottom keeps dropping out of like, oh, this is amazing, my life. If people could be in my being, they wouldn't believe it. And then I'm like going along, and then another bottom drops out, and you got to be kidding me. And then some chunk starts coming up to be detoxed from, primordial or pre-verbal childhood, and then it's and then it goes through, and whoo, and they just learn to stay with it. And
and even feeling that on a collective level, especially when I feel out into our world, and especially the United States with all these shootings, and the shooting that happened at Dayton a couple of weeks ago is actually at a place I used to hang out at, and my good buddy of mine, his child was there, and fortunately it wasn't hurt, but just feeling the collective. And I think you can see it all around that, like people are, as a collective, we're losing our minds. And one of the things that's not spoken about much is just the value of being radically open, feeling, not only what's in oneself, but in all of life. And there's times, throughout the day where I'll just be walking along, and I'll just have tears pouring down my eyes. And, is this mine? Is it pre-verbal? Is it,
right.
Is it when I was a teenager, they had the crap beat out of me, or, oh no, this feels like, those individuals who are at the shooting, and just to feel that collective trauma and
that's
pain.
right.
And like you're describing, as awareness, as the bottom keeps falling out of it, it's more and more you feel, you experience both the hugeness and the peace and the compassion, but also, you have to be tough, to be willing to feel and experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's why I live in New York City. It's like, 90 some percent of all spiritual teachers I know live in beautiful,
Yeah.
bucolic places. And I'm like, let's serve, let's go right into the
Yeah.
subway. I sit in the subway and I just do these glimpse practices
Yeah.
and with my eyes open, or then I'll just close my eyes and I'll look up and other people are closing their eyes
Yeah.
and doing some meditation. And
Yeah.
I'm like, look around, I give them a little nod and
Yeah.
they go like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's, and then just responding to different things, being part of the marches and doing service work with kids. And it just feels like it's part of this seeding of the, being one of the, serving a group that I, was born in this area. So it just feels like I'm, staying here to do what I can do because I know it naturally. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful thing. 'Cause one of the things that happens, I've seen especially with spiritual teachers is they can become quite isolated.
Yeah.
And, there's this beautiful feedback that happens when we interact with the world, interact with the community.
Yeah.
And, we're welcome, we're welcoming feedback, especially a place like New York City.
Right.
Feedback is, it's in your face.
Yes, that's
It's
right.
in your face. With me,
Yeah.
I have children, so the feedback is really
Yeah. Right. It's in your face.
It's in your face, and you see it, and I think that's a real healthy thing to be a teacher and a therapist and actively engaged in our world.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is a good way to end with talking about how we kind of are bringing it out in an ethical way, realizing that we're, that's the great gift of a certain kind of embodying awakening for me is like, it's a humility that wants to serve. And it's like, I don't really care about applause or anything. Like, I don't want, like, I find I don't hide, but I don't, I'm glad to get up there and say basically, you know what, the water's great, come on in, like you won't believe it. I'm telling you, you can do it. This is learnable. It's teachable. It will affect and help so many people. Here's the traps. Here's the detours. Here's the map that, and, bring your own language to it. You can call it what you want. I'm very resonant with different learning styles. People are kinesthetic or auditory or visual. So I'll use those doors and, to help bring people to the same principle of consciousness that is hidden away that then unfolds beautifully like a flower once it's discovered, and it shares itself in a resonant way with others. So that's kind of why I wrote this, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness. It's really a guidebook that you still would need to do experiential practices, but it kind of lays out the map in a simple contemporary way.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I love about Yalak is you take these teachings, especially teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. And, in the past, when I've studied Tibetan Buddhism, what I found is it's so utterly complex, so much hierarchy in it. There's so much lineage and rules and, all these steps we have to make. And you take it and you make it very simple and very practical. Yet the power is not lost. The power is not lost. And that's one of the great gifts that you have. And in your writing style too, it just makes it simple. It makes it direct. It makes it clear. And to me, it's a beautiful thing. And, like you were saying before, the engagement is, both the individual waking up to their non-dual nature, but then also the engagement is fully here. On planet Earth. And a lot of teachers, they're either, like fully, seva-based or service-based, working in homeless shelters and doing this and that, or, they got their head in the clouds. And it's beautiful to me. It's about, of course, doing both because, true non-dual unity includes all aspects of being. And, like you said, once you wake up to something beautiful
Yeah.
and the water's nice,
Yeah.
the natural movement of the heart is to
Yeah.
share it. Of course, not
Yeah,
the
exactly.
proselytizing way, but just,
No.
the welcoming way. Just seems
Yeah.
like a
In
natural
kind of
movement of
in
love.
kind of a democratic way too, to kind of empower people
Yeah.
and yeah, to access to really find that loving presence that then once you are willing to do that next stage of embodiment and loving those exiled parts, those repressed shadow parts that
Yeah.
we've naturally all repressed. We've all had trauma.
Yeah.
So so the first thing is to find the solution, that which can bear what seems unbearable, that which can heal, be that, and then invite the parts slowly in their own time to come forward. And then it's what I call shake and bake. They kind of start to kind of shake and bake. But then once you've done shake and bake, once you've done some healing, some unburdening, and you establish yourself as the true self, as the true nature, and your whole system starts to it starts to become so alive, and you feel like, what a precious human birth.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Let's give it a go. Let's see if we can help each other.
You're actually happy to be here on planet Earth. I spent so much of my beginning of my spiritual path just trying to get rid of Craig and trying to get off planet Earth. And then at one point I can remember, speaking to, mutual teacher friend, Adya, about this. At some point along this path, I realized how much I loved this guy and how much I actually enjoyed being him.
Yeah.
And boy, was that just a shift, because then I was actually ready, not only ready to come to planet Earth or to fully incarnate, but I was happy to be here, in the mud, in the confusion, in the chaos, and in the sandbox. And
without denying, in this cultural time where there's so much pain and suffering, and we're able to see it more, because it's not that it, is that much worse than the 30 years war, the 100 years war, the Genghis Khan, and if you look at History Channel, it's like, oh my God, all 14-year-olds were conscripted into the army and killed each other, for 30 years. So we just see it clearly, and we've developed this intelligence and consciousness to feel sensitive, but we still have this ego that's trying to make sense of it, and then even a spiritual ego that, I got to help, and we get overwhelmed. So really, it's time to upgrade. It's to then be able to serve and show up in the midst of, imperfect human life that's painful and will continue to be painful and joyous.
Yeah. And boy, do we have to get our act together, because with global warming and all that's happening, all the mass, extinction that's happening on the planet, it's like, oh, we better figure this out soon.
Yeah.
We're going to be in big trouble. So anyways, it's so nice to have you here today, Locke. And, one more time, Locke has 2 books, Shift into Freedom, which is excellent, and The Way of Mindfulness, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness, both available from Sounds True. So I encourage you to get those. And Locke, we really welcome you.
Yeah, thank you.
To the ASI. We're really happy to have you
Thanks.
joining us here.
Yeah,
so
thank
nice
you so much. Yeah, appreciate it.